In the short history of this podcast, we've routinely referenced a handful of powerful and influential individuals, from John Muhammad Khan and Abdul Razak in the south to Abdul Rashid Dostman in the north and Ismail Khan to the west. These four men were but a handful of many with varying backgrounds and political allegiances can all be tied back to one person, Hamid Karzai. The son of the leader of the Populzai Durrani Pashtuns, Hamid Karzai would flee Afghanistan during the Taliban rule, only to return after 9/11 and quickly ascend to the presidency. After initially serving in an interim capacity, Karzai was elected president in 2004 and re-elected in 2009. Seen as a man who could unite the country to oppose the Taliban, Karzai's administration was riddled with corruption, appointing friends and supporters to powerful positions without taking into account their qualifications. This week, we try to provide some context into who Hamid Karzai is and how his administration was both a benefit and a detriment to NATO operations in Afghanistan. As always, we can be found on Instagram and Facebook, both at the Boardwalk Podcast, and our podcast streams on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Pandora. Please like, subscribe, rate, review, share with your friends, and get the word out. Any additional questions you may have that you don't want to reach out on social media, we can be reached by email at theboardwalkpodcast@gmail.com. Welcome to the Boardwalk. All right, welcome to episode 12 of the Boardwalk. Today we're going to be talking about Hamid Karzai, the first president of like the new Afghanistan, I guess, if you will, the new and maybe improved. We're going to spend a lot of this episode talking about who Karzai was, why his rise is relevant, and kind of where Afghanistan went with him both in his first term and his second term, because I think there were vastly different visions for Afghanistan under the Karzai administration from his election in 2004 and his election in 2009, and then kind of where we stand now. Kyle is going to give us a little deep background on Karzai and his relationship with the Shah, or the monarchy, if you will. So it's going to be fun. Hamid Karzai is for sure a very, I would say he's controversial, but a very intriguing individual when you look at what we've done for the last 20 years in Afghanistan, because you can't tell the story without him. But before we get to that, last week we talked about the Kebab House, the restaurant on the Boardwalk. And when we published that episode, I tagged the owners who now live in North Carolina, and they sent us a message on Instagram. Hey, thank you for the shout out and mentioning us. If you're ever around, come get some food and say hi. And so we took that as an opportunity to ask them if they wanted to come on the podcast. So Leo and Homa, the owners of the Kebab House in Kandahar, which is now Afghan Kebab in Fayetteville, North Carolina, will be our guests next week. We call all of our friends special guests, but these will be the first truly special guests that we're going to have on, and it's going to be for the most part just an interview format, talking with Leo and Homa about their experiences pre 9/11 in Afghanistan, post 9/11, their visions, what they would like to see for their home country of Afghanistan. It's going to be very unique. I'm really excited for that. And I told Kyle and Stu, and I think we're, as much as we want to do that episode, we're got to do this episode first. So Hamid Karzai, where do we start?
Yeah, Karzai is certainly a polarizing figure. I'm on the side that I don't necessarily think Karzai is this villain necessarily. Obviously, he's a politician, and politicians are corrupt by nature. But I don't think that Karzai is this villainous entity. Now, the reason the United States hates him, obviously, is Karzai said some pretty nasty stuff about the United States and criticized U.S. intervention in Afghanistan. I mean, arguably the same intervention that elected him president of Afghanistan. So it's like, I get where he's coming from, like 90% of the time, but it's like, I mean, U.S. intervention put you in the position you're in. So it's weird to listen to him criticize it. But a little bit of background. I mean, Karzai's straight out of Kandahar, like He's straight out of Kandahar city, so ethnic Pashtun Papalzai tribe. So we talked a little bit about the Papalzai branch of the Durrani Pashtuns pretty early in this podcast series. So his dad was a politician, Abdul Ahad Karzai, and he was in parliament in the 1960s. And both him and his dad were, well, to say him and his dad, but his dad and his family supported Zahir Shah. Zahir Shah was the last king of Afghanistan, and we can kind of go into Zahir Shah a little bit later. I'll have to pull up my notes, but basically, his I believe it was his brother deposed him while he was away, and kind of brought in a democratic government rather than a monarchical. Is monarchical the correct term? Rather than a monarchy system of government. So
it is now.
It is now. Yeah, we're rolling with it. So the Karzais always supported Zahir Shah, and he's going to come into play later. But so Karzai comes from this political background, and so as a politician, he has to kind of walk a very fine line in Afghanistan. And people have criticized Karzai from trying to be friends and make friends with everybody when there's people that clearly hate his guts, and maybe just trying to be a little bit pragmatic, a little bit too pragmatic, possibly. So he goes to school there in Kandahar, graduates high school there, and then I think he went to India for his master's degree in international relations, and then basically lived in Pakistan and did fundraising for the anti-communist Mujahideen. So during the Soviet-Afghan War, so fierce supporter of these Mujahideen, these warlords. So anyway, there's this whole period of time in Karzai's life where he's moving back and forth, kind of between Pakistan and Afghanistan. He helps out the Mujahideen mainly politically. I couldn't find too much in my research to suggest that Karzai was much of a fighter. I mean, much like me here on this podcast. Like, I mean, I'm more than willing to support the people out there kicking ass. I don't think I have what it takes to be out there sleeping in the middle of Afghanistan, waging war against the Soviets. So, but he definitely supported them politically and monetarily. So, so he's providing this support. Then, obviously, and we've talked about it on the podcast before, Soviets, of course, get kicked out, and this giant Afghan civil war starts. I mean, Karzai gets arrested by his eventual vice president in his first term. Like, there's like this story, like the vice president arrests him for like supposedly working for Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, and Karzai says that he was just trying to mediate between Rabbani and Hekmatyar, and it's a mess. So
I'm going to assume, because Afghanistan has a system with two vice presidents, that it was not Karim Khalili that had tried to get Karzai arrested. Karim Khalili was the Hazara vice president.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to find who it was. Mohammed Fahim.
Okay.
So he eventually becomes a vice president, and so that's kind of like during this Burhanuddin Rabbani government that kind of bridged the gap between Soviet withdrawal and the rise of the Taliban. So he's working for the government or during that time, and then Taliban comes into power, and Karzai is like, yeah, they're legitimate. They're going to stop all this corruption and violence and maybe end this massive civil war that's going on. And then,
which was the general consensus among a lot of people, like we talked about in our Taliban episode.
We did.
Kind of forget how well received they were.
I mean, yeah, exactly. I mean, there's hope that these guys coming in and hanging warlords from tanks may bring about some order to this. I mean, especially Kabul, which had been like under shelling for like months, just these guys fighting each other and killing innocent civilians. So yeah, I mean, he legitimate. He says the Taliban government's legitimate, but I think the Taliban asked him to even work for their government. He refused at that point. Anyway, relationships, very much sour. Karzai's going off to Italy, where Zahir Shah, who we mentioned earlier, is living in exile. So Karzai's going over there to talk to Zahir Shah. He wants to reinstate the monarchy in Afghanistan. Obviously, the Taliban aren't really a fan of that. 1999, Abdullah Had Karzai, that's Hamid Karzai's father, is shot dead by the Taliban. After that, Karzai's like, you know what? I'm a Northern Alliance man now, and he starts working with Ahmed Shah Massoud. And from there, it's pretty much Karzai helping Massoud and these early special forces operatives in that early fight in 2001 against the Taliban. And obviously, I mean, that sets him up for a political career later, and that kind of leads to his first presidency. If you guys want to take over, start talking about.
So when I was looking into Karzai, right? Because I know there's very little on him militarily, and I found some. Basically, they look. It's almost just journals from some of the SF guys that he was in cooperation with, and like you said, Kyle, they all said he has no. It's not even minimal military, but he has no military background, right? What Hamid Karzai provided is his father was the leader of the Populzai, and Populzai is second, third largest Pashtun subtribe, 500, 600,000 people, something like that.
It's really large. I mean, I think it is the largest branch of the Durrani Pashtuns. So, yeah, that's a huge thing. It'd be like, Barakzai and Populzai, and I mean, those are the big ones. So, yeah, to be a leader of them.
And they really center around Aruzgan, right? Like, Hamid Karzai was born in Kandahar, like you said. He's more of a Kandahari. His hat, I believe, is it's what that. If you've seen Hamid Karzai, he's got a hat that I can't remember the name of it, but I think they call it a Kandahari hat, right? Yeah. But the Populzai Pashtun are really based out of Aruzgan, and so Hamid Karzai, his rise is in 2001, where we have an SF team goes into more than a team, but American Special Forces, along with CIA operatives or operators, whichever term you want to use, go into Aruzgan and they work on just clearing the Taliban. And Hamid Karzai was with them. And as is known to happen when you're dealing with matters of warfare, things get romanticized. And Hamid Karzai went from being escorted through a now Western and Northern Alliance controlled Aruzgan to Hamid Karzai led the charge and cleared the Taliban from this stronghold. And that is absolutely not what happened, but people don't care, right? The story, if you believe the story, then the story is true. And so Hamid Karzai cleared the Taliban out of Aruzgan. With that, he was, I hesitate to say this, and I don't mean this with 100% sincerity, but they almost tried to prop him up as like the George Washington of Afghanistan. He's politically independent. He's seen as somebody who can unify and unite various tribes and parts of the country for a common good. He seems somewhat reluctant to assume that mantle, that responsibility, which once he gets that responsibility, it's very obvious that that is not at all the case. He was probably aiming for it the whole time. Like you said, he's a politician, and with every politician, especially in today's day and age, there is that level of, it may not necessarily be corruption, but it could be self-interest. So he played the game a lot, but 2001 happens with the immediate aftermath of clearing Aruzgan and the short-term U.S. successes and pushing back the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. You have the Bonn Conference, which was that November 2001?
Yeah.
December?
Pretty much.
You have the Bonn Conference where NATO, pretty much everybody gets together in Bonn, Switzerland, and they're talking about Bonn, Germany, excuse me. Bern is in Switzerland. This is really where the coin mission kind of starts, because now it's like, okay, we need somebody to lead the country. And so they choose, like Mitch said a couple episodes back, the most powerful guy from the biggest sub-tribe of the biggest tribe. And so they chose Hamid Karzai. And he's the interim president from 2002 to 2004. And then you have the election. And then you start to see Hamid Karzai start to move pieces around the chessboard and I'm not going to say centralize his authority, but he does things that a politician does, right? He starts making moves to consolidate his power in certain areas. He starts giving friends, not kickbacks, but Ismail Khan had a ministry position. He was a Mujahideen commander from out west. Abdul Rashid Dostum, Mujahideen commander from the north, was in his cabinet. Kareem Khalili was one of his vice presidents, who was a Mujahideen commander for the Hazaras. You start to see that rewarding of the Northern Alliance and the guys that worked with the Northern Alliance. And from there, first term isn't terribly too bad, if you want to help kind of flesh that out a little bit. But then really in 2009, after he gets reelected and Afghanistan has the same policy where a president can only have 2 terms, well, he's got nothing to lose. And so you start to see that consolidation of power. His brother was in, his brother was what was he, the police commander or I know Ahmed Wali Karzai ran he ran opium down in Spin B before Razik did.
Spin B.
Was he ever?
He was a provincial. He was a provincial. He was just a provincial council member in Kandahar.
That's right. That's what it was. He didn't have chairman any
of the
law
provincial
enforcement
council.
Yeah.
And on top of that, the connection with the Khans up in Uruzgan, who were a big part of the reason that he wanted to work with the CIA and special forces to clear out that area first. Because if you free John Muhammad Khan, he would give you Uruzgan. And then as the years went on, similar to Razik, John Muhammad Khan was also probably very heavily involved with the opium trade and Uruzgan, which I think is the 4th highest producing province in Afghanistan. So, but again, using it to solidify his power, and there were definitely times when John Muhammad Khan held in some areas the ability to influence Karzai probably more than any other single person because of the deep relationship they had and the trust and respect that Karzai had for him.
I think you're right there, and Kyle, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think a large part of that is that even though the Popalzais is the largest, most represented group in Uruzgan, and the Karzais were the head of the Popalzai tribe, John Muhammad Khan and the Khan family ran that province, so they still had to get buy-in from the Khans, depending on what it is that Hamid Karzai maybe wanted to do.
Right. So, and I'm checking my notes here really quick. But yeah, I mean, they're the same. They're the same tribe, so obviously they're going to have connections, especially when you're talking about the Khans and being big in Uruzgan. I mean, Karzai is huge in Kandahar. I mean, so you have this, and I think we talked about it earlier. Is this Popalzai? Maybe not quite a minority, like apartheid kind of rule by them, but almost this. If you're an enemy of the Popalzai tribe, man, you are in trouble after 2001 because, like you said, I mean, Karzai's moving these pieces around a chessboard, and he is so tribally affiliated that if your tribe or sub-tribe is not allied to the Popalzai tribe, man, you are screwed big time. So because you got the Khans in Uruzgan, you got Karzai, his brother, running things in Kandahar, and I mean really across the nation. But I mean, it's a bad time to not be a friend of the Popalzais for sure.
Yeah, and I think if I'm not mistaken, the first chess piece to move was when Gulaga Shirzai became the governor of Kandahar.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, yeah,
that's got it, because like you've said, he was Gulaga Shirzai was a Barakzai Pashtun there, very closely allied with the Popalzai. Gulaga Shirzai, we all know, is very corrupt, and he's very self-interested and self-motivated. And one of the first things Karzai did as president was he appointed Gulaga Shirzai the governor of Kandahar province.
Right, and I think that was from maybe Gulaga saying he had saved Karzai's life at some point. I believe I think that's the story, that Karzai says he owes his life to somebody, and it might have been Gulaga. And I feel I do remember that story at some point, and I'd have to look it up because I've got notes from back when I was doing the Green and White podcast. But I'm 90% sure it was Galaga. That there's some sort of story early in Karzai's life where Galaga may have saved him from something. So I mean, he owes him, so he he gives him this awesome role, especially if you're corrupt.
Yeah. Well, and Karzai was I'm sure we'll eventually get to Ashraf Ghani. He's probably corrupt too, but I don't think it's on the same level as Karzai. Right? There is for years now widespread speculation that not only is Karzai's administration corrupt, which I think is obvious with things like his brother Ahmad Wali Karzai, running drugs through the Shaman Spin B checkpoint into Kandahar, which he was eventually killed in 2011 by the Taliban, and that's when Abdul Razik became the myth. That he was
left a little power vacuum there that Razik filled.
Yeah, there's a power vacuum, and Razik picked it up. But Ahmad Wali Karzai was super corrupt, and to the point that there were allegations that, and this isn't just Ahmad Wali Karzai, but a lot of regional power players in the Karzai administration, that not only were they, grifting from NATO or the U.S., but they also had Taliban members on their payrolls, whether it was to not attack certain areas, which I've always understood why commanders would do that in Afghanistan. That's a pretty common thing. You saw it quite a bit. Allegations of, it could even be a checkpoint commander's like, oh, we're going to give the Taliban our fucking food so they leave us alone. Like, I get that. I understand that. But then you also had, reports that these Taliban guys these Taliban fighters were on the payroll, like helping run drugs or guns or money, just, the various nefarious activities they could do. And that's kind of died down some with the Ghani presidency. But I think with Karzai, there's too much, there are too many instances of it for it to not be true. And I think it does go back to, I think Ahmad Wali Karzai might be the most corrupt person from the Karzai administration. Yeah. And he was the chairman of a provincial council. Like, he didn't have any actual authority.
I mean, it's kind of the relationship like of a 1940s or 1930s Chicago mayor with the mafia. It's a guy who's willing to get his hands dirty, by working with ostensibly the people that he's supposed to be opposing, as long as it's to their mutual benefit. And it's easy to definitely easy to make that happen if you're in the right position. And Afghanistan is rated what bottom 5 like world corruption for the past 20 years.
Depends on what Africa's doing that month, I think, where it comes in.
Well, they might go up a spot or two with South Africa being in flames right now.
That's true.
I don't know.
True. But I mean, Ahmed Wali, and I don't even think it was just Ahmed Wali. I'm pretty sure the entire, if I remember right from my time over there, that the entire thing was kind of, all of his family members were fairly corrupt. My favorite, though, is there is a Karzai brother who I think owns an Afghan food restaurant in
Maryland,
in DC. Yeah, Maryland or DC. Yeah. And people were
his family owns several of them.
Really? Well, one of them came to America. I mean, several Karzai family members had come to America, then gone back to Afghanistan. But the one just came to America, and when people would try to figure out why he was there, why aren't you back in? He's like, I hate Afghanistan. So it's like, it's so much more chill here. And I think he owns restaurants or something. So, I mean, good for him. I mean, he got out of it, because you saw what happens when you don't get out of it. You got Ahmed Wali and that whole
I wonder where he got the seed money.
Oh, yeah. Well, the seed money is a certainly interesting way to phrase that, because in 2004, I was reading, there was an international proposal to end poppy production in Afghanistan through the aerial spraying of chemical herbicides. So literally chemtrailing poppy production out of Afghanistan. And Karzai is like, no, I think that would harm our economic situation. Yeah, it would certainly harm Ahmed Wali's economic situation. But
if we have any anti-vaxxers that listen to this podcast and they hear about us proposing spraying chemtrails in Afghanistan, they're gonna double down, and COVID will never go away.
I'm not I am not advocating the aerial spraying of herbicides. Period. Like I don't advocate for it, but that was a proposal because I mean the poppy production got bad and it just got worse and worse and worse. I think it's probably worse now than it's ever been in the history of
Yeah.
Afghanistan. So, but
When
yeah, it's
the
interesting.
year that we were there, Kyle, when the SIGAR, Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, they put out a quarterly SIGAR report, and I believe there's typically like a yearly roll up. That, or maybe I'm just looking at like issue 1 for that fiscal year. And so we were there 2016, 2017. So the SIGAR that came out in February of 2017, it showed all of the counter narcotics operations, and it's always written in terms of acres or hectares that is cleared of or eradicated from opium. And that year, the number of hectares eradicated from opium production in Kandahar, I believe, was 6.
Yeah, like,
and like the year before it was a couple hundred. The year before that was a couple hundred. At the height, they eradicated like 1,000 acres, and I'm sure in the 10 years since they did that, that has all been reestablished as opium cultivation.
And that's, I mean, I'd love to do just an episode on the opium trade because
I'm sure we will.
It's absolutely amazing. I mean, that year we were there and they come out with the GMO seed. Yeah, you want to go full conspiracy theory nut, dude. We can do that with the GMO seed, the poppy GMO seed they started passing out to farmers. Yeah, that's weird. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Point is, the Karzai family, or at least Ahmed Wali, profited significantly from the opium trade. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure Hamid saw that. But you mentioned earlier, Zach, you said something about like, Hamid Karzai centralizing power. Well, he didn't really. I mean, Karzai, the president of Afghanistan, is really like not the most central power authority in the world. Like, you see that with Ghani when he tried to get Adenor out of Balk, and he was just like, nah. He's like, you're fired. He's like, no, I don't think I am. And he's still the governor. like, you don't have a whole lot of authority. And the article I was reading, like Karzai called himself the mayor of Kabul because that's about how much he felt his authority stretched. And that's really not a very wrong thing to say, as far as being mayor of Kabul. Absolutely. Because you got people like Ahmed Wali running Kandahar at the time, or you got Razik later running Kandahar, and you got the Khans and Uruzgan. Yeah, you're not the commander in chief of Afghanistan. You're
so maybe centralizing power was the wrong turn for maybe I should have said making moves to
for sure
benefit him.
Absolutely. I mean, now if you put your people in those right positions, you're good to go.
Yeah, and that's to his credit. Ashraf Ghani has not been able to put the right people in the right positions.
Oh.
So Karzai, like we talked, he's a brilliant politician, right? He's a politician to the bone, and the 10 years that he was the duly elected president, unlike the current president, voter fraud does exist in Afghanistan. Unlike Ashraf Ghani, when Karzai was the rightfully elected president, things have never been truly good in Afghanistan, right? But he had a somewhat competent government to an extent that you didn't have these issues of governors being so corrupt that maybe we do need to look at replacing them, which I know we had that talk several times when Ghani presented his whole anti-corruption campaign, and then we realized very quickly that this was going to go nowhere because the corrupt ones are the competent ones.
Mm-hmm.
And Karzai, I think he understood that, and just he didn't give a shit. He didn't. I'm sure he profited off of Ahmad Wali running drugs and guns through the Spin B checkpoint, and at the same time he didn't care because Ahmad Wali Karzai helped keep the place safe. He worked with the CIA. He gave them what became Firebase Mahalik, or FOB Mahalik, which was Mullah Omar's old compound. Right? He worked to establish and build those relationships at least up through his first term as president.
Right. Yeah.
It's kind of interesting or funny because of Karzai had such a firm grasp on the specific politics of different areas when he was installing his guys. He made sure there were no tribal issues or familial issues or generally no personality issues that would mess things up enough to where the gravy train would stop for everybody. And then you kind of see the real like reversal of that with Ghani, and it kind of mirrors Mansour's um, move into replace Omar, where you start seeing a lot of issues with like Taliban provincial governors not really binding in very very well with their new positions, and so you see a lot of movement of provincial leaders and shit. I know it's just interesting to me how that sort of mirrors on both sides of the war there.
That is an interesting mirror. I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, I don't think there's any doubt that Afghanistan under Karzai more stable than Afghanistan under Ashraf Ghani. I mean, I don't know. I don't necessarily think it's even the U.S. troop presence there. I think that Karzai had a much better handle on those people, that those chess pieces he moved around, like you said, Zach. He had a much better handle on them, and they worked better together. Even if it was working with corruption, it's still better.
Do you think it might also help that Hamid Karzai didn't live in America for 46 years and teach at Cal Berkeley?
I would say that. Yes, that Karzai has a much better. He has his thumb more on the pulse of Afghanistan than Ghani, for sure.
So, in preparation for the episode, I was really curious as to what Hamid Karzai's net worth was, and it ranges anywhere from 20 million to 300 million, depending on who you talk to. Listen, okay, Warren Buffett's net worth does not fluctuate by that much. They're like, yeah, he's worth somewhere between 85 billion and 85.2 billion. Right. It's not between 20, it's not, he could be 85 billion. He might be 185 billion. I mean, Karzai, it's between 20 and 300 million. I guess it depends on if you have access to the Cayman Islands.
Well, I don't know how they calculate people's net worth that aren't the United States and they don't use tax records. I've always wondered, because they say, the richest man in the world is, Jeff Bezos or whatever. But that's probably not true. I'd say the richest man in the world, I'd say Vladimir Putin has him beat probably 10 times over. So yeah. In these places where corruption is a lot more easy to maintain, I think you can make a lot of money, which is why his, quotes about his net worth are so widely.
Maybe the 300 million was Pakistani rupees. Who knows?
I don't think Karzai is struggling, and I don't think Karzai will have trouble finding a private helicopter to get out of Afghanistan when the Taliban start knocking this fall. So he'll be okay.
I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if his family were billionaires by this point either. There's a pretty wide fluctuation that could go down there. I mean, shoot, the poppy market in Afghanistan, I think, goes above $1 billion every year currently. So
yeah, you got to wonder how that's all distributed, how the profit's distributed. I mean. Yeah. Isn't that the question? If you could figure that out, I think you would know a whole lot about how the world works. I think if you could figure out where the poppy money goes to, you would probably also be car bombed when you got in your car. I'm serious. Dead serious.
Probably. Yeah. The CIA would, they might step out. They might be a little busy. They're trying to right their wrongs in Cuba right now, so maybe now's the opportunity to release that information.
Now's your chance. Yeah, I don't know. I'm afraid of that information. I seriously do think that there's certain information that's dangerous to know, and I believe that if you knew where all that poppy money was going in Afghanistan, you'd be that's dangerous information. I don't want to know.
As with any president, or really major politician for that matter, there's always going to be complaints, and Hamid Karzai had there are a lot of complaints regarding Hamid Karzai, and the one that I think sticks out to us the most is when Hamid Karzai pushed back against what is known as night raids, which it's very simply put, the U.S. military operates at night. So at night, you go into a village, you have a suspected Taliban or Al-Qaeda fighter or just a bed down location or a house. Go into the house, pretty much detain everybody, figure out who's who in the zoo, release the non-combatants, and go from there. And to Hamid Karzai's credit, it was controversial, right? Like it's snatch and grab in the middle of the night. That's not very common. I think the biggest issue that he took with it was just you the policy of pretty much detaining everybody and then working backwards from there. But the night raids were also at the same time a very key uh, very key tool, a very important tool that we had in our toolbox to help combat the Taliban and Al Qaeda.
Well, and it was they temporarily essentially detain everyone so they could make sure that no one would come up and shoot them from behind, and then generally you'd get the guy you were going after and bring him out of there. Like a lot of things that I don't like how a lot of things get portrayed at home for people who they haven't really been normalized for. You know what I mean? It's like it's not as bad as it sounds. I mean, getting raided at night is pretty. Like if the ATF does it, it's bad. But the U.S. Army has a little more restraint, and they generally won't shoot your dog.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I've always said yeah, you couldn't if you did that in Afghanistan, you'd be facing a court martial if you just started doing that, and somebody got wind of it. Like now that you can freely do that in the United States against U.S. citizens. But anyway, that's a side point. But the night raids is an interesting thing because anytime you go into somebody's house, it's like, well, what's the information that led you there, right in the middle of the night? And we talked about some of that false information coming from like Galaga Shirzai or John Muhammad Khan and his ilk, and sending people on these raids. And now you've got boots kicking your door in. You haven't done anything wrong. Well, all of a sudden you maybe start sympathizing with the people that are against these soldiers that just raided your house. So I've got a Washington Post article up talking about the Afghanistan papers, which we've also covered on this podcast. And they're interviewing Karzai. And so basically the Washington Post, I guess they were the first ones that published the Afghan papers. Well, some of those arguments that Karzai had against American intervention and stuff, apparently they claim they're partly vindicated. I haven't gotten to that part as far as going over all those claims yet, but it also portrays his past government, quote, as a dysfunctional kleptocracy that was unprepared for modern governance. And Karzai's like, yeah, much of it's true. Yeah, probably. Like, I love that.
That's why he wanted the monarchy.
Yeah, sure. And he saw, and it says like findings that report that echoed two of his longtime assertions. One, that Afghan contracts with U.S. agencies were widely plagued by corruption. Yeah. And that U.S. military officials played down problems with civilian casualties. Absolutely. And then he starts talking about those night bombings, raiding homes, bombing villages. And he says, if you want to fight terrorism and bad people, I won't stop you, but please leave the Afghan people alone. Yeah. So that's fair. That's a fair complaint, I'd say.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't disagree that it's a fair complaint. It certainly is. And my issue isn't even necessarily his opposition to night raids, because like Stu was saying, if that happened in the States, we would be livid, and I can live without the night raids. My issue with Karzai really is more like post-president Karzai has been to look at it from that the realpolitik point of view. He has not been a friend of America since he left the presidency.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, some of his most scathing words have come since he stepped down. But I mean, he's been criticizing everyone since he stepped down. He's talked shit about Ghani, he's talked shit about different like military commanders. And there he got really mad about the MOAB.
Yeah,
he called Ghani. He called Ghani a traitor after the MOAB happened. It's like,
so for context on that, and Kyle covered this on the Green and White podcast. In 2017, we dropped a MOAB. It's a massive ordnance air blast.
Right? It was awesome.
Yeah, it's a big ass bomb that kills everything. We dropped it on a cave system in eastern Afghanistan. I want to say Nangarhar, but was it okay? So we dropped it in Nangarhar. It was a cave system that was like 100 and something ISIS or Islamic State in the Khorasan province fighters were bedding down in there. We dropped this MOAB, killed like 130 of them. To the best of my knowledge, no civilian casualties and no
Right.
damage to anybody's property. And Hamid Karzai shit a brick when we did that. He was very much not on board with it. And my initial thought was maybe he's pissed off because we didn't tell them we were going to do that. Just like we didn't tell Pakistan that we're going to come grab bin Laden a mile away from your military academy.
Mm-hmm.
But I think he was just mad about the size of force that was used. And we criticized last week the amount of money that these ordinances cost. And a great example, when Kyle, you posted about the episode, you had that Sebastian Younger quote about we're chucking $80,000 rockets, from a guy who doesn't make $80,000 in a year towards a guy who doesn't make $80,000 in a lifetime. Right. So the MOAB is certainly a lot more than $80,000. But when you look at bang for your buck and knowing that we killed, it was like 120 something ISIS fighters, that was actually a pretty decent trade-off. Right. And from that counterterrorism perspective,
and it was my understanding that it was nearing its expiration date too. So I was like, you might as well. I was hoping
use it or lose it. Use it or lose it situation.
It's like a milk in the fridge.
That's one of those from that counterterrorism perspective. That's a good op. I have no issue with that. I don't think anybody should. But Karzai, and like you said, Stu, he has become that guy that is just negative about everything, and he will criticize anybody and everybody at any given chance. And I think that is one to project that independence that he claims to be. And I think part of it is I think he is playing the long game, and maybe he is looking to position himself to be ruler for life after some sort of agreement can be made with the Taliban. Who knows?
Yeah,
I'm not saying he's going to lead the Taliban. Don't get me. I'm not saying that.
Right.
But he could be trying to come back into a position of official power.
I think
some kind of like prime ministership or something.
Yeah. I would say Karzai certainly wants, and he's expressed that before, as far as like calling the Taliban brothers and wanting to build some sort of, I think, consensus or some sort of maybe try to reconcile the government with the Taliban. I think that's kind of a far off, fantasy maybe, but that's tough. I get where he's coming from. I mean, these are his Pashtun brothers, fighting against each other in southern Afghanistan, and I get why he would want to do that. I mean, he's expressed, wanting to give amnesty to Taliban fighters and everything, which I'm not opposed to giving amnesty to Taliban fighters. But that precludes, or that comes before this massive resurgence by the Taliban we've talked about. In a time when the Taliban wasn't massively resurging, the idea of coming to reconciliation looks really good, but why would you want reconciliation when you're crushing them? I don't. That's tough. Unless the Taliban just feel like maybe getting back with their Pashtun brothers and trying to come to some sort of agreement. I don't know. I hope so, but I doubt it.
Yeah, I don't see the Taliban.
I guess he still is the key to half of Kandahar's and Uruzgan's populations, for them. So
that's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah, I mean, he's still respected amongst his Popalzai and Durrani Pashtun brothers. I don't think he's ever not going to be respected. He's a powerful figure in Afghanistan, and he's no former king. We talked a little bit earlier about the Zahir Shah, and in 2001 or 2002 they called this the Loya Jirga, which is a meeting of all these tribal elders, and Karzai has stated this before, especially when they were doing the re-elections last time. Karzai wants a traditional Loya Jirga called because he wants the tribal members and not some sort of. He wants the tribal members to come together and decide on the future of Afghanistan. I think that's fair. That's how they've always done it. And the Loya Jirga, they said, well, you're going to be the interim president when it was called last time, or when it was called early in his presidency. But there were talks. I mean, they were talking, and Karzai himself was talking about bringing back the monarchy and reinstating Shah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, all of these, there's so many possibilities. And of course, the United States doesn't really want to put a monarch into power, but there's so many possibilities, with the Afghan government, because Zahir Shah had a fairly productive and peaceful government when he was in, and he was
Yeah.
well respected amongst a lot of the different um, people groups there in Afghanistan. And I think
Before the
Karzai
Reds
is too,
came.
to some degree. Yeah, before the Reds came. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah,
I mean,
I
I
mean,
don't.
yeah. And I mean, the Loya Jirga makes total sense for Afghanistan because, I mean,
Oh yeah.
like there has to be a certain level of like centralization for a democracy to work, and to be that spread out with people that like may never see the capital in their lifetimes, like trying to come up with a
Hmm.
leader. Like it's like it would be like the uneducated masses of the 1400s or 1300s, voting for
Right.
stuff. Like they aren't ready for it at this time.
And all these tribes, I mean, they decide on a leader for a reason. I mean, this tribal leader, they're elect or not elected or chosen or however the tribe does it. They're
Yeah,
chosen to resolve these tribal disputes, and they're expected to fulfill a certain role. And if you have a Loya Jirga and bring together all these tribe members, not just Pashtuns but Uzbeks and Tajiks and everybody else, I mean, you might be able to come to some agreement better than just having some
so some
central.
illegitimate vote that's gonna
Yeah.
you're gonna see the ballots stuffed anyway. There was quite a bit. I wouldn't say that Karzai's initial elections were totally clean, but it
Mhm.
got bad when it came to like Ghani and Abdullah. Because
Oh yeah.
I mean,
I don't think
I
they're.
think all of us have a consensus that Abdullah probably actually won the election.
Probably, yeah,
Yeah.
very much so. But Abdullah would be like electing more. I mean, they didn't. I mean, powers that be. I hate that conspiracy term. I mean, they don't want a traditional Afghan after having to deal with Karzai and his stuff. But it, going back to Karzai a little bit in this Washington Post article, Karzai, like the intel officials or the high ranking military officials that were involved in some of this Pentagon paper stuff, or not Pentagon, Afghan paper stuff, they talked about how Karzai was very much early on concerned about corruption and all this excess, and he says about American aid, instead of bringing stability and peace, the report said the United States inadvertently built a corrupt, dysfunctional Afghan government that remains dependent on U.S. military power. So, and Karzai said the same thing. Like he's like he just assumed that a corrupt government is just what you get when you funnel just billions of dollars into a country that has no real plan for what to do with it. You're going to get corruption. He's not wrong. I mean, he saw it firsthand. I mean, like, where did all this money come from? I've never seen money like this before. And it's like they build crappy schools or something that, like, where did the money go? Like,
Yeah.
the school blows over in the wind. He says, where did the money go?
And you still run into like ghost soldier problems and
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
guys selling their weapons to the Taliban and defecting and all of these other issues. Like it, I don't know. Like the U.S. definitely had issues with their implementation, but I mean, it's you can understand why it failed, even if we had done everything correctly, because because the money wasn't definitely wasn't spread out enough by the corruption to keep enough military leaders happy enough to like basically do what Razak did. And hell,
Correct.
Razak might not have ever been as effective as he was if he didn't have all the supplemental opium money to sort of save himself and be able to pay off families and soldiers and shit.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Right. Yeah.
I think so. The ghost soldiers, we have talked about it a couple of times, and we haven't explained it. So the ghost soldiers is it's a phenomenon. It's not a concept. It is a phenomenon in Afghanistan where the pay system. If you've seen, certain movies that take place in World War II, when an American soldier would get paid, they would get in line and they'd like stand there with an ID card and they would be handed their physical paycheck or money. And that's how we're doing it in Afghanistan. They're working on becoming more electronic like we are, which that certainly won't get hacked by anyone. They're working on becoming more electronic, but the way it would work is the commander, be it a battalion commander, I don't believe it went down to the checkpoint level. It might have gone down to the checkpoint level, but the commander would pretty much say, yes, I have 60, I have 60 men in my company or my platoon or whatever. And so they would then receive the money to pay 60 people. And then in reality, that commander probably had 30 people. And then the reality on top of that is he was only giving them half of their paycheck. So he's collecting the money for 45 soldiers and pocketing it, and that was a huge issue, especially in southern Afghanistan. And when you read about Afghanistan prior to the Taliban rise, I don't think anybody should really be all that surprised because corruption did not arrive with the US and NATO. Corruption predates the Taliban. Right? One of the things that people appreciate, well, that's not maybe not the right word, but one of the things that people do identify with the Taliban is that when the Taliban extorts you, especially in the South, the results are a little more immediate. It's a concept that economist Murray Rothbard referred to as pretty much scales of efficiency. And when you can see the immediate result of your taxes, or in this case your bribes or extortion, you're a little more at peace with the situation at hand. And so yeah, the Taliban are they're bribing and they're extorting the population just like the Afghan government and military is, but at the same time they are providing safety and security. The shops are open and people are able to conduct commerce, which was not happening with the Afghan government. And a large part of that is the Ghost Soldier program under the Karzai administration.
Yeah. I mean, definitely compared to the Afghan government, you're getting a lot of bang for your buck. On top of all of the, ability to conduct commerce, you get a functional judicial system. You get potential jobs. If you want to join the Taliban, as a clerk somewhere or something. So there's definitely a lot you get out of it.
Yeah, and something I wanted to kind of bring up. When we talked about Karzai and referring to the Taliban as brothers, I think I think there is some sincerity in that when you look at Pashtunwali. I wonder if some of it is just messaging to the more conservative South, which will be more likely to support the Taliban independent of what's going on, regarding a civil war or anything like that. I wonder if that's, maybe getting in the good graces isn't the right term, but trying to appeal to those more conservative Kandaharis and guys from Helmand who are going to support the Taliban regime regardless.
Yeah, I mean, never lose your base. That's his base down there. As long as you keep them happy, you at least have a certain level of power. All right, hey folks, thank you so much for coming and hanging out with us. This was a pretty fun episode. We are very excited for next week's episode. So again, tune in. We're going to talk to a lovely couple who have a ton of first person experience with what was like during and pre-Taliban reign, and then post-Taliban reign. This is the coolest guest that we've had on so far. We're pretty pumped for it. So again, feel free to check out our socials, like we said, and we'll see you next week.